Okay, well, in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. A few more people might kind of trickle in here. My name is Emilee Gaulke. I work for UW-Madison Extension. I am the Diversified Vegetable Educator for the greater Milwaukee area. We are joined today by Beth Kazmar, co-owner and farmer at Tipi Produce, who we'll be hearing from shortly. What we're first going to start with is a quick poll. We want to know what experience people in the audience have had with hot water seed treatment previously. Okay, so it looks like about 70% of people, at least who responded, have not tried this practice before. There's a few people who have tried it and want to refine their technique, and 2 people who treated previously decided to stop at the end when we have Q&A. I'll be very curious for those people who have tried it before and then stopped or want to refine their technique to have them chime in and share their experiences and be able to ask Beth some great questions. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about hot water seed treatment as part of a larger system, kind of talking about disease management through an IPM framework. What seed-borne diseases are out there that you might be encountering and why we care about them. The science behind hot water seed treatment, what seeds it works well for and doesn't work well for, and then some recommendations about when you should be treating and some methods to implement this on your farm, which Beth will be talking about, including why she started and how she's done this successfully through the years. So when we're talking about hot water seed treatment, we're really talking about disease prevention as part of your larger disease management plan. Within your IPM framework, you want to use a combination of different practices to prevent, detect, control your disease. This combination is important because you'll have greater effectiveness if you're using multiple different practices. And you'll see the base of our IPM pyramid here is prevention. That's the thing you want to rely on the heaviest. And prevention is key because for many diseases, once a plant is infected, there's not going to be a cure for it. And if you are growing organically, you're going to have fewer options available for disease management if you do have an outbreak. So when thinking about hot water seed treatment, we're really talking about early season disease prevention. And there are several different practices that you can stack to get the most benefit. And these include variety selection. So if there are varieties that fit your market and have disease resistance, those are good ones to choose. Thinking about your crop planning or your crop rotation, not growing the same crop family in the same place year after year to really interrupt that disease cycle. Sanitation is a big one. You want to make sure you're starting with a clean greenhouse, clean seed starting and transplanting supplies so you're not infecting your crops. And then what we're talking about today, clean seed. So you can ensure clean seed either through seed treatment, or you can check with your seed rep, your seed company, and see if they either treat the seed before you buy it or certify disease-free, which we'll get into a little bit more later. So seed-borne diseases, they're diseases that are carried by the seed, either externally on the outside of the seed coat or can actually penetrate inside your seed. And they have the potential to be transmitted to your plants that are grown out of these seeds. Bacterial diseases are notorious for spreading through this method. Things like your brassica black rot, bacterial speck, for example. But fungal diseases like Alternaria or Cladosporium, as well as viral diseases can be seed transmitted as well. And we should really care about seed transmitted diseases because they can be a way for a pathogen to first get introduced onto your farm, creating a new issue, or it can perpetuate an existing infection. And the earlier a pathogen encounters a crop, the greater your chance for a serious outbreak to occur. So we really want to reduce or eliminate the pathogen load early on, reduce your chances of a large outbreak. And Beth is really going to dive into some of these diseases in just a little bit. So the science behind how hot water seed treatment works. Well, first, let's take a step back. So there's several types of seed treatment. There's things like chlorine and fungicides. The thing to note about those treatments is they only kill pathogens that are on the outside, on the seed coat. It won't kill anything that already got into your seed. Hot water seed treatment, on the other hand, can kill pathogens both on the outside and in the inside because the heat is able to penetrate into the middle of the seed and kill those pathogens. It works really well for small seeded crops, things like your solanaceous tomatoes, for example, brassicas, small seeded cucurbits. But please note, this is not going to work for a large seeded crop like beans, peas. The temperature you would need to get it up to for the heat to penetrate into like that bigger seed would just be too hot and damage the outside of your seed. And speaking of temperatures, you're going to need a very precise temperature and amount of time at that temperature to both kill the pathogen but not damage your seed. I will share out resources after the webinar that has your specific time and temp requirements for each crop and pathogen. And Beth will talk about how she accomplishes this on farm. Please note that while hot water seed treatment will kill pathogen that's on the seed, it's not going to protect your plant once it germinates. And that's why we want to think about the larger like IPM framework, controlling diseases at multiple stages. So when should you treat? This is only a portion of the recommendations of the crops and the pathogens, but this list can be really long of things that can be hot water seed treated. It can seem really overwhelming, but it's not going to be practical to treat all of your seed. So when you're deciding what you should treat, there's a couple different things that you want to take into account. And one of these would be seed source. If anyone is saving their own seed, if you're growing seed in the fields where you're also doing your commercial production, these commercial fields can have ample pathogen reserves. So seed from these fields can have a greater likelihood of pathogen getting onto the seed. And you should not be saving seed from a diseased plant, but should you choose to use a seed from a plant that had some disease symptoms and that's a seed-borne disease, you really want to make sure you're hot water seed treating it to not keep the disease going through the seasons. There also can be a slightly higher risk of seed-borne pathogen incidence when management tools during seed production are limited. Think about organic seed, for example. If you're producing crops organically, you have like less chemicals, less fungicides you can apply, and the same goes for seed production. So this would be when you really want to check with your seed dealer to ask about any testing the seed has undergone, or if it's been treated already. Beth was kind enough to do some of the legwork for us on brassica seed, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But it's really important to have a good relationship with your seed rep so you can find out this information. You also want to think about the diseases that you're worrying about and the characteristics of those diseases. So how destructive is the disease and how often is it seed-borne? Something like black rot of brassicas, it's a very common disease. It can be extremely destructive, take out almost a whole field really easily. And it's among top seed-borne diseases. So if you're not getting certified disease-free seed or seed that's already been treated, that should be a priority. Thinking of something like bacterial spot or speck. These can be highly seed-borne, moderately destructive on farm. Again, something that could be a great priority for your farm. These diseases, these are fairly common on tomato, pepper, brassicas, but they can easily be treated through hot water treatment. There's other diseases, carrots I don't have on the screen here, but Alternaria and Cercospora can be seed-borne, but likely don't have as large of an effect or impact on your crop, not as big of an issue, and so less of a priority. Then thinking of something like spinach, they have seen outbreaks of cladosporium out in the Northeast in fall and winter high tunnels. However, thinking about something like the quantity of spinach seed that you need, like it's not going to be practical to hot water treat that seed. So that would again be something where you want to talk to your seed dealer, make sure you're getting something that's clean and managing that disease through other means. And then finally, if you've had any past disease occurrences on your farm, so you might want to consider treating seed if you've had the disease occurred like once or maybe every couple of years on your farm, and you have other potential sources under control. So if you have a high pathogen load on your farm, you need to make sure you're addressing this through other management practices. I've hit on this before, but hot water seed treatment is just a piece of the puzzle. And if you aren't managing disease at other stages, like again, the heavy pathogen load in your greenhouse, high levels of infected residue in the field, your return on investment from hot water treating your seed is going to be reduced or even eliminated just because you have so much pathogen on your farm. So really think again about your larger IPM framework when you're incorporating something like hot water seed treatment. With that, I am going to pass it off to Beth.
So, I want to talk today about my 25 years experience hot water treating seed on our farm. Sort of what I've learned along the way and our decision making as we expanded the practice. First off, let me introduce myself. I'm Beth Kazmar. My farm is Tipi Produce. We're south of Madison, southern Wisconsin. My husband Steve Pincus and I have been farming together for many years. I've got, I think it's 27 or 28 seasons under my belt. Over the years, at our peak, we've sort of been between 35 to 45 acres of certified organic vegetables, mixed vegetables for CSA, and wholesale markets, lots of different crops. I have a master's degree in plant pathology, which is a great degree if you're a farmer. I use it all the time. And I do want to share that we are headed into what we call semi-retirement. So we're going to eliminate our CSA and wholesale markets. We will be at about 1.5 acres of various U-pick and a few other crops. The experiences I'm sharing go right up to last year when we were still in fairly big production. We were at about 20 acres last year. So again, I'm sharing my own farm's experiences. All right, Emilee did a good job setting up sort of the framework of decision making, why we would do this. On our farm, what are my priorities? What are my goals in hot water treating seeds in making this effort? Number one goal is to avoid bringing new diseases onto our farm. There's a very long list of diseases that can be transmitted. I've never seen most of them. I don't want to see them. Second goal is to avoid starting an epidemic on our farm. As Emilee mentioned, if you introduce a pathogen early in the process in the greenhouse, when it can spread on transplants, you're going to, invisibly on transplant, you have a greater risk of creating a large-scale epidemic on diseases that you might have on your farm otherwise, but that you can keep to low levels with good farm management. But if you introduce it in the greenhouse, you're setting yourself up for a much bigger problem. And as Emilee already discussed, well, it's only one part of our farm management. These are the crops that I hot water treat: tomatoes, peppers, and brassica crops, cruciferous crops. Tomatoes is for bacterial. Tomatoes and peppers is bacterial and leaf spot and bacterial speck, and then very much black rot management on the brassica crops. These are our greatest concerns. Again, to emphasize, you could have invisible spread in your greenhouse. It does not take many bacteria to start an epidemic. And so, for example, black rot, I know I'm showing peppers, but it's similar levels for bacterial leaf spot on peppers. It only takes, for black rot on brassicas, 1 bacterium per 10,000 seeds is enough to cause a field level epidemic. So starting with clean seed is a really valuable effort. What I want to do now is talk about the 3 crops that we hot water treat and how I decided to incorporate those crops in treatment. I started 25 years ago treating tomato seed because of bacterial speck. We'd had years of this little black specks on the surface of tomatoes. They're dark, they're surface raised, they're sort of greasy. If you've had it, and the reason I'm showing these photos is you can ask yourself if you're experiencing these problems or not. It always helps to take a look at the diseases so you can recognize them at the start. But if you've had this, you face the decision of, what level of speckling is still good enough to sell that produce. I just had the suspicion that we were bringing it onto the farm in a couple of the early varieties that we, first plantings for slicers. I started hot water treating the seed, got more confident with it over the first, I'd say 2 or 3 years. Started to treat more and more tomato seed, did a big cleanup of all the flats and whatnot. That's a big part of the problem, is if you've contaminated your greenhouse flats, you have to clean those. We can all do it. And within a couple of years, we'd essentially gotten rid of bacterial speck. That was very satisfying. We reintroduced it 2 years ago. There was some seed that sort of slipped through, and I didn't hot water treat. And it was a bunch of packets of things that we were just growing a few plants for us and our crew, and we didn't treat that seed, and we sort of reintroduced it. So it was interesting. I mean, it confirmed that we can manage it, and we should continue hot water treating. Oh, I do want to mention that all of our tomato production is outdoors, not in hoop houses. Great. All right, let's move on to bacterial leaf spot, which can infect both peppers and tomatoes. Take a look at those pepper leaves. It's not an uncommon disease. You can show up on the fruit as well. A long time ago, I saw a devastating outbreak on another farm. We traced it back to some saved seed, and that farm started a program of hot water treating and disinfection. That was their path to improvement. On our farm, we did have a pretty bad outbreak about 15 years ago. I couldn't trace it to individual varieties. I just decided to start hot water treating pepper seed as well. So that was about 15 years ago. So I've got 25 years with tomatoes, about 15 years with peppers. I'll also point out that on bacterial leaf spot, there's some very good breeding efforts for resistance in peppers to bacterial leaf spot. And so when you're choosing your varieties, if you're having trouble with bacterial leaf spot, go ahead and incorporate some of those varieties. Some of them are very nice. All right, let's move on to black rot. We grow a lot of brassicas on our farm, including storage cabbage, which is a very important crop for us. I want to show pictures. The upper right photograph has the classic V-shaped lesions at the end of collard leaves. That's because the bacteria can come in from the edge of the leaves on those. They're called hydathodes. That's where those droplets form overnight, pushed out by root pressure. And those droplets, it's called guttation droplets. They are sucked back in the day and then pushed back out at night. If bacteria gets into that sap and is pulled into the leaf, you get an infection looking like this. It can also happen at wounding. And if you look closely, I did a zoom in on this spot. So if you look at the bottom right photograph, you can diagnose black rot yourself by looking for black veins. You're not looking inside dead tissue because those veins could look black, but you're looking at the edge of tissue like that and looking for these little black specks. That is the bacteria moving through the plant vascular system and tissue. And when it's black like that, you know you've got black rot infection. It will keep going in a bad infection, an early infection. It will have time to keep going and reach the stem and kill the plant. So there's a lot of different brassica crops that we all grow. Symptoms are pretty different, can be different. And so I have that photograph of rutabaga. It looks very different on rutabaga. This is a photograph that I took when I was submitting a sample to the diagnostic lab at UW to find out for sure what this was. And this is what I do. If I'm going to submit a sample, I'm going to take a picture. Rutabaga E10, that's the crop in the field where I harvested that from, so that when the results come back, I can tie these things together and show my crew and remember what the symptoms look like. As I mentioned, if the infection's early enough and bad enough, it will go down the stem, and you'll see that kind of black ring inside the stem. This is a field of storage cabbage. Storage cabbage is an important part of our farm production over the years. Our version of season extension is winter storage crops that we store, wash, and ship through the winter. It keeps our best employees going year round. A big part of our farm. if you look in the middle of that field, you can see all those kind of silvery heads. Those are dead and dying. We had, starting close to 15 years ago, we had an occasional year where our losses to black rot in our cabbage and other crops it was just too high. And we said, all right, we need to get a handle on this. And I started hot water treating brassica seed at that point, as well as thinking about what else we could do for overall brassica management. We're talking today about hot water seed treatment. If there's time at the end, I'll also talk about some of the other management approaches that we wanted to think about. All right, so what I want to do is move on and talk about the equipment that I use. I do have a handout I prepared to share with you guys. This just shows the front page of it. I'll refer to it. Emilee is going to distribute this 6-page handout to you guys after the webinar is done. I've got lots of details in there. One of the first sections is called Resources, and the first article that I've linked there is one that everybody should read. It's a real good starting point. It's put together by 3 extension scientists with really deep experience. It's a great starting point. And there's a lot of detailed information in that handout that I'm not going to present today, but you're going to how to treat seed. You'll find it useful. All right, this is my very simple setup. Look at that. This is not an expensive setup. I think the most important decision, if you're going to hot water treat on your farm, is what are you going to use to keep your hot water bath at a consistent temperature? And I chose to use an insulated jug. I started with a 2-gallon jug. This is a 3-gallon jug. As I treated more and more seed, I just bumped up to a larger jug. Extension scientists will use laboratory grade hot water baths with very consistent temperature control. I have found that in this jug, as long as I've got it well equilibrated and I keep the lid on, I can do a good job holding the temperature steady. So this is an important decision. What are you going to use for your hot water bath? And the other one is, what are you going to use for a thermometer? I chose to use this. I have an electronic thermometer that I trust. This is about $65 right now. That's probably the most expensive thing in this setup. Then you have a pot or a pail that you'll use to pre-warm your seed before putting it into your bath and to cool when it's out of the bath. In my setup, I have jugs of boiled water, kettles, and cold tap water. That is how I tweak the temperature. Temperature drops a little bit, I add in a splash of boiling water. You have to figure out how you are going to package your seed to treat it in the bath. I'll come back to that. And then clean envelopes. Once the process is done and the seed is fully dry, you're going to want to repackage it. You don't want to put it back in the original packets. A few other tricks. I put a piece of foam insulation underneath that jug. It helps slow heat loss out the bottom and makes it a little easier to stabilize the temperature. I don't want the seed packets sitting on the bottom of that jug. I want them suspended in the middle of that hot water bulk. And so I put anything on the bottom to keep the seeds from sitting on the bottom. And for me, an overturned bowl will do it. Here's seed packets. This is what I've tried a couple different approaches on how to package the seed, starting with squares of clean new row cover. You put your seeds in here with a label that is going to survive the hot water treatment. I use washers to keep the buoyant row cover submerged. Over the years, I switched to these mesh bags that we sewed from window screening. I started with window screening you can buy at the hardware store, and then switched to a finer mesh called no-seam screen. I've got some details in my handout. The finer screen means that fewer seeds will escape. It's just a denser screening. We still have a few things that are too small for this. It's a couple of cherry or grape tomatoes. And so most years I've still got a few things that are in row cover. In terms of thermometers, one of the extension scientists has, what he does is they recommend this thermometer. This is linked in the article that I recommended from my resources, so you'll get to this if you follow the links in that handout that I gave you. What he recommends is buy 3 reliable mercury thermometers, bundle them together, and use sort of the average temperature. I thought that that was clever and very doable. All right, let's talk about the steps that are involved. There again is my setup. First thing, point number 1, does your seed need to be treated? Do not treat seed if it has already been tested for pathogens or treated to clean up pathogens. I'm going to come back to that because that's a decision-making point, but that is your first step. If you decide you want to treat the seed, then you go on. You package the seed, like I talked about. Set up your hot water bath. If you're using a system like mine, it's important to let it equilibrate. I get up in the morning, I set up that jug with hot tap water and a couple of kettles of boiling water. I seal it up and I leave it alone for 1 to 2 hours. It's letting the whole jug equilibrate, and then I start to tweak the temperature. I'll bring it down within 1 to 2 degrees of my target temperature before I start treating, and then I get it equilibrated at my target temperature before I start the process. Then, point number 4, I take my seed and I preheat it in a pail of hot tap water. I want to get the seed wetted. I also want to get it warmed, because when you put seed into your water bath, it's going to shift the temperature down. That's why I'm equilibrating, let's say, 1 degree higher than my target temperature if I'm not treating too much seed, 2 degrees if it's a larger volume of seed. This is the kind of thing you're going to figure out from your own experience. All right, you preheat your seed, squeeze it out, put it into your water bath, submerge it. You've got it all set up for the right temperature, for the right time. For example, 122 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes for tomatoes. You've got your timer started. You're watching the temperature. I have my thermometer in there, poking out while the lid is on and the whole thing is covered with a towel. You're just stabilizing the temperature. I'm watching. Occasionally I stir because you don't want the temperature to stratify in there. I'm watching it closely as I put the seed in and doing adjustments with a splash of hot water or not soon after adding the seed, because that's when it will change the most. Otherwise, I might have to adjust it, let's say every 5 minutes. It's not bad. When the time is up, now my pail has cold tap water. When the time is up, I take the seed out, put it into the cold tap water, stop the process. I blot the packages dry, and then I with a towel, and then I move them someplace to dry. I put ours in our greenhouse. Those little window screen packets dry very well. You do have to shake them once in a while. There's been times when our greenhouse is stuffed to the gills, and so you can see that bulb crate with strings in the middle of the photo. So if the greenhouse is really full, I'll just suspend them in a clean bulb crate from the rafters. It does not take long for the seed to dry. We have also dried seed in a food dryer with the heating element turned off. All right, so this is the guidance. Do not treat seed if it's already been tested or treated for pathogens. The general guidance is you don't want to be repeat treating your seed, because each time you treat the seed, it's essentially accelerating the aging of that seed. That's been explained to us by one of the extension scientists who's worked in this for a long time. So you don't want to keep doing that process. However, how do you know if the seed that you receive has been tested or treated for pathogens? Couple of steps to take. First, take a look at your seed packet. Sometimes, this is more the exception than the rule, but sometimes your seed packet will have information stamped right on there. It might say, your pepper seed or your cabbage seed might say, tested for, XCC is the code for black rot bacterium. And it will explain in this tiny print that seed has already been tested and is free of pathogens. Like I said, most of the seed that we receive does not have that information on it. you can ask your seed rep. I think this is a good moment to explain the difference, to point out the difference between seed growers and seed sellers, so that when you buy your seed, it's not always grown by the people that the company that you're buying from. Some of it might be. There are companies that we never deal with who are large seed producers. Beho, Sakata, Enzazaden. We never interact with those companies, but they are the ones growing the seed. And if the seed is going to be tested or treated for problems, it's done on the level, it's done in the hands of those seed companies. So if you receive something, you want to know if that particular lot of peppers has been tested already, you can ask your seed rep. All the seed reps that I've talked to over the years have said, yes, reach out to us, tell us the lot number that you have. They have the information that I've described that comes from the seed growers. They have access to that, and they can verify for you whether or not that seed is clean of pathogens. And then next point is think about, what promises your seed seller is making, and I'll come to that in more detail. I will tell you that I have done this. I have tried to trace back lots through asking our seed reps for additional information. I quickly found it to be very cumbersome and slow, and so I sort of backed away from that, finding it was slowing us down on our seeding schedules. What we are doing now, we have moved to treating all of our tomato and pepper seed, unless I know it's tested, but I am selective about what brassica seed I treat. There's a couple reasons we've reached this conclusion. In all these years of treating seed, I do not think I have ever damaged seed. I compare the germination rate with the germination rate that comes on the seed packet, and I don't find that the germination rate has gone down. So I have this confidence over these years that I'm not damaging the seed. So we've moved to just treating all the tomato and pepper seed unless the seed packet tells us it's been tested. In other words, there's a good chance that I could be treating something that's already been treated. I am not having problems. However, we are much more selective about brassica seed. There's two reasons. First of all, tomatoes are considered very robust for hot water treatment. Peppers are next most robust. Brassica is considered more delicate. So it's probably a good idea to still have that information before deciding whether to treat. The other thing is that brassica seed is a lot bulkier. Tomatoes and peppers, they're only being grown on our farm and on your farm as transplants. And so, the seed volume to plant an acre of peppers is not very big. Unlike brassica seed, let's say radishes, which if you're seeding, direct seeding in the field, that's a lot bulkier seed. I do it when needed, but it's a lot more work. And so if I can gather information about that seed and avoid that effort, I'm going to do it. All right, this slide has a lot of information. I've done a lot of legwork, and I'm happy to share it with you guys. This chart is in the handout, my handout that Emilee will share with you. So this chart comes from me approaching those 4 seed companies that you see across this top. I started years ago with this, and I asked them the question, what promises are you making to us about cruciferous seed? Is the seed that you're selling tested for black rot? So for example, if you look under crop, first crop is broccoli, and I asked this question of Johnny's, is your broccoli, do you promise that your broccoli seed is tested and is free of black rot disease? Their answer is yes. They make that promise. The plus means that they're making the promise for black leg as well, a different seed-borne disease which I have never seen. They are promising that all the seed that they sell of this list of crops is free of disease. I do not have to test this. I do not have to treat any of these crops if I've bought them from Johnny's. Move on to the next cluster of crops, starting with arugula down to turnips. No, Johnny's does not promise that this is free of disease. However, instead of no, I really should have written here lot by lot. These are the kind of crops that you might want to reach out to your seed rep, because some of the lots that they're selling, some of those sources of seed that they're selling have been tested, and that's where they can help you decide whether or not you have to treat your very bulky radish or rutabaga seed. And then some growers are also concerned about cover crop seed and microgreen seed. Johnny's encourages you to check your catalog for more information or call your seeds rep. Let's move on to high mowing. High mowing, down here under notes, they have made a commitment that all the cruciferous seed they sell is tested for black rot and black leg. It's a very impressive list of crops. This is great. Seedway. Bayho, as I mentioned, is a seed producer. Bayho does an incredible job with this. They are really leaders in their field for testing and treatment. When I talk to Seedway reps, all they want to do is talk about how great Bayho is. They sell a lot of Bayho seed, as well as the other seed sellers. So they just want us to emphasize that anything that comes from Bayho has been adequately tested. And if you know it's a Bayho seed, you don't have to worry about treating it. Otherwise, contact your seed rep on a lot-by-lot basis. Osborne, I've listed their commitments here as well. Very helpful. And so, again, this information is in my handout. I use all this information deciding what to treat. I will tell you that I treat a lot less brassica seed than when I started because of these efforts by the seed companies. So if they are taking care of it, I don't have to. This is great. I want to move on and talk about some advice that gets repeated a lot in extension protocols and about, am I following that advice or not? Point number one, don't hot water treat old or weak seed. I have to trust that extension folks know if that's true or not. We don't do it. You don't always know if your seed's old. You only know how long you've had it. But again, if this is accelerating the aging process, don't treat old seed. And I'll also say that apparently once we hot water treat seed, we are probably violating any guarantees from our seed companies. Something to consider. Point number two, you see a lot of extension protocols saying treat a small amount of seed of each lot before treating that lot. I do not do this. It is impractical. As I've said multiple times, I've sort of gained confidence, and I'm taking a risk. You know, if I kill the germination on that seed, I'm going to have to quick buy some more, but it hasn't happened yet. However, when you are getting set up to hot water, to teach yourself hot water seed treatment, doing it for the first times, you definitely want to practice this technique with some seed that you don't care about, that you can, you know, refine your treatments and see if it's affecting the germination or not. You also see the advice, dry seed quickly after treatment. Maybe. There's some folks I've talked to who hosted treatment clinics for their growers, but then the growers have to travel home before they can even start the drying process. And it seems like even up to 4 hours, it doesn't necessarily cause problems. I wouldn't, you know, if you can avoid delaying the drying, I run mine straight out to the greenhouse. It's always good. You don't want to start the germination process because that's going to shorten the life of the seed. Next bit of advice, treat seed for just the current growing season. We do that. We treat the seed we plan to use this year. Will we use it the next year? Yeah, we'll hang on to that seed, store it well, and if we're short, we'll use it. We've seen the germination seems fine in the next year. After that, I'm not hanging on to the seed. You see advice, point number 5, to disinfect your hot water bath between seed lots. I've never done this. I had not thought about this. This is fairly new guidance. In that first resource that I recommended, they do have a link to a ozone generator, which is what they're using in their hot water treat setups. So that's an idea I haven't considered. Or adding peroxyacetic acid to your water, to your cooling water. The idea is that if you were not doing a good enough job, you could actually be transferring pathogens between seed lots. I hadn't worried about that. Okay, we're good on time, good enough. I want to briefly go back to brassica management because, as I said, we started the hot water seed treatment, but it's not the only change we made. Here's basically a quick breakdown of what we think is important on our farm for managing black rot. We seek out resistant varieties. If you can buy a black rot resistant variety, that's a great thing, as long as it fits, agronomically with the other qualities that you need. I don't think there's any black rot resistant storage varieties, for example, so that's kind of a need. We continue hot watering, treating brassica seed selectively using the information that I explained before. Black rot persists on our farm. It's low levels. It's probably on the weeds or maybe residue that's blowing around. I watch out for it. If we see early infections, we do our best to avoid them. What we're trying to do is make sure we're not moving those low-level infections onto transplants in the greenhouse. So think about, you're harvesting your earliest cabbage, and it's July, and there's some black rot out there, low levels. You don't want to then go from that job into your greenhouse and handle your transplants, because that's a path to bringing the black rot bacterium into your greenhouse. So watch for these and avoid them. We have concluded it is critical to stay out of fields when they are wet, at least when you get close to harvest. Again, there's these low-level infections. All the diseases I'm talking about accelerate in wet weather. They spread in wet weather. If you move them through the fields, you yourself can start the epidemic. So you can have these low levels on your farm. And then if you, for example, send a weeding crew into your fields when they're wet, early in the morning, you can create your own epidemic. And we've done it. I think tractor cultivation, I think is less risky. I just think sending people in has been a problem for us. And I've spread black rot myself. I've gone into fields thinking they're dry, going in just out and see if black rot's there. I find this cupped water in the leaves. I get it back out, and then 2 weeks later, I can see the path of where I walked. So stay out of your fields. It's the biggest thing we think to managing disease on our farm. Copper. There's copper products labeled for black rot control. We never pull it off. It's never become a priority in our spray program. As I mentioned, I don't think it's being spread too much on our farm with cultivation. It's always possible. This is a picture of those glutation droplets. Make sure your plants are dry before you send them in. But of course, you have to go in early enough in the day for the weeds to then die. This is what we're all looking for, is a beautiful field without that black rot. You'd be looking on those lower leaves for the first signs. This field's in good shape. Okay. Let's see if I had anything else. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share. All right. Hopefully you guys can see me again. Okay. Yep. I just want to take a minute and show a couple of other things. So these are our seed packets that I talked about. Useful. A neighbor sewed them for me. Didn't take too long. That's the size that's good for tomatoes and peppers and small amounts of cabbage seed. When we're doing anything that's field crop, I also have larger bags. You have to, and a really big bag. Your seed has to be able to move around in that bag. Otherwise, you're not going to get the temperature to, penetrate into the seed if you have this giant ball of seed. And therefore, we need the larger bags as well. I did want to be realistic and talk a little bit about, I lay all this out. Do we accomplish it all? Where do we, I don't want to say fail. Where do we neglect? Are there times where we say, we just don't have the bandwidth for this? And it's often the later seeded crops like radishes. Getting around to treating that kind of bulk seed later in the year seems to be just a sticking point. And so, and when you think about it, if you're planting that in early fall, let's say daikon, let's say Korean daikon, because I don't see much black rot on it. You're planting it early fall. We're just tractor cultivating it. We're not sending crews in if we can avoid it. There's not a lot of in and out of those fields. Your cabbage crop is really getting closer and closer to maturity. Once your crop is, if you can keep it disease free, you're not going to necessarily keep black rot out for the entire season. What you're trying to do with storage crop is just get it closer and closer to maturity before you have any spread in that field, and that works. And so those later, radish plantings and whatnot, there's just less opportunity for spread because we don't have any transplants and we're not spending much time in those fields. So I did just want to say, every once in a while we have to be, change our decision making. So that's all I've got. I think I'm going to hand it back. Emilee, you've got more, right? Thanks, you guys, and we'll hopefully have time for questions. I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, I want to be really brief because I want to make sure there's time for questions. But hopefully everybody can see my last slide here. I just wanted to talk really briefly about if you have a disease outbreak on your farm, what are some next steps you can do? The biggest thing is you want to make sure you're identifying the proper disease. There's a lot of great UW resources. I will send some of these out later. There's the UW Vegetable Pathology website, and there's these great disease profiles. You can search there. You can go to the Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic website, which also has some really great disease profiles to help you identify. Sometimes it can be really hard to identify just by looking at pictures and visually trying to identify. So you can actually send in samples to the Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic. You can send in physical samples or pictures, and someone like Brian Huddleston or Amanda Gevins, who has been identifying diseases for years and years, might be able to identify for you, or say, yes, send in the sample. We need to actually use a physical sample to properly identify. If you need help with identification, you can reach out to me or your local extension agent. I have my information on the next slide. And there is also this really great Ask an Agriculture question. You submit your question, this is what I'm seeing on my farm, here's some photos, and then that'll be directed to the proper person to help you take the next steps. So once you have identified your disease, you want to find out more information on your disease, like how is it introduced on your farm, how is it spread, and is it potentially seed-borne? Unfortunately, it can be really hard to determine if it is seed-borne. As Beth said, seedlings can often be asymptomatic and the disease might not show up until later in the field. There are a few occasions where you'll start seeing symptoms develop on seedlings when they're still in the greenhouse. That's a big clue, but again, that doesn't happen very often. Another clue might be if you have a big, large, sudden outbreak of a disease that you have not had previously on your farm. That might be a clue. Doesn't necessarily guarantee it though. If you do end up suspecting you have something seed-borne, again, you can reach out to Extension for help, and it's also helpful to reach out to your seed rep. They might have some more information for you, know if anybody else has been seeing something similar. And then from there, you can determine your management options. So here is my email. Beth has also been gracious enough to offer her email. If you have any questions on hot water seed treatment, you can reach out to her. But I do want to make sure we have time for questions. So we will open it up now for questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. I can read them out, or feel free to just come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Katie. Thanks for this really great presentation. I do really like to save tomato and cucumber seeds, and I will ferment them for a couple days. And I'm wondering, just thinking out loud, does it make sense? Is it good timing to do the hot water treatment right after they fermented while they're still wet before having, to worry about drying them and then doing hot water seed treatment later on in the season? Can I just do it kind of right away?
Boy, to me that sounds logical. It sounds logical. A couple things. So your tomatoes, that fermentation process actually does help clean up the seed, but it really is exclusive to the seed that's to pathogens that are on the outside of the seed. So if you have, for example, viruses or a bacterium that can get inside the seed coat, you still need the hot water seed treatment. So I know we have some people from the seed companies here. If they have a different answer about your timing idea, maybe they could unmute and answer. I do want to say cucumbers, I don't know if you can hot water treat cucumbers. Large seeds generally aren't as good with hot water seed treatment. By the time you get good heat penetration inside the seed, it seems like you kill it. One of my resources has disinfection protocols for larger seeds. I can't remember if there's cucumbers in there. I remember it's got beans. So that even if you can't get the internal pathogens cleaned up, it gives you some options for surface disinfection. And I'm not sure if they use organically accepted disinfectants or not. I can't remember. Other resources. Does anybody else have a different answer to that question?
I'm just going to pop in here with something else really quick. We do have a demographics form. We are required to ask. We get federal funding, so this makes sure we are compliant with federal non-discrimination policies. So while we are doing the Q&A, if people wouldn't mind responding to this, you can also choose to prefer not to respond if that works better for you. Thanks.
Hey, I'm going to jump in on the comment in the chat that elemental copper is unhelpful to human health. I hear you. On our farm, we minimize spraying. If we can use science and logic and prevention, like hot water seed treatment, that is always our first approach. We do spray copper on our tomatoes. Again, outdoor production, all for tomatoes, and that's a tough call without copper. Over the years, we've switched to materials like Cueva that have a lot that are effective at a much lower concentration. But I put the copper up on black rot management with a question mark. By the time you have, much disease out there, I don't think you certainly can't prevent spread within that plant. You would only be trying to prevent spread to other plants. I just don't think it's that effective. And like I said, we haven't really explored that too much. We feel like everything else that I've described for managing a black rot has really gotten us closer to managing it without having to do any sprays. Good point, though. I hear you.
Is anyone here that has hot water treated before that might be willing to share their experiences, especially if that's something they decided not to do anymore?
So if they haven't left yet, are any of the seed company participants still here who have any comments they want to make about this topic or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great webinar. I work at Johnny's Selected Seeds. I work in Q and RA. We actually don't do the hot water treatment that happens at our farm, and so I'm really curious now as to how they actually perform the entire process. So I kind of want to reach out to them and see how similar it is. I don't know what they use. I'm assuming they don't use a insulated water jug. But that's totally possible that they do. So I'm curious to find out more about that. So yeah, thanks for this webinar.
Hey, Mike, when you say they, what are they using? Are you talking about people within your seed breeding programs, seed production?
Yes.
Who are you talking about?
Yeah, so we like our farm has multiple departments. We do have seed production. We have, generalized farm help out there. It's usually performed, I think, by our product management, as well as the people who work under them as well. So it's a pretty big group, and I'm not sure who does all of it, but I just don't see it because we own multiple facilities and it doesn't happen in this building.
Yeah, that's a situation that really justifies investment in lab grade material, supplies and equipment. So I did want to say those, big companies like Bayho, they've got, giant equipment, and they're even using not just hot water, but sort of experimenting with steam treatment because they find it's effective at killing the pathogens and can be done very, very quickly, so it has less impact on the seed. So it does seem like the seed producers, those companies are doing interesting things with figuring out how to clean the seed.
Any other questions for Beth while we have her here? All right. Well, if anyone does think of any questions later, again, you have Beth's email. She's been gracious enough to be willing to help us out with our hot water seed treatment in the future. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming to this webinar today and shared a link for some more upcoming webinars. We hope to see some of you there soon.